Welcome back, everyone, to the next episode of the Why I Don't Like podcast. I'm your host, Christian Ashley, here to entertain you as I sit down and record episodes on the media that I consume and yet I don't like. We will be continuing on through Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation, focusing on Season 1, Part 2, Episodes 12 through 14. This is just your friendly reminder that, hey, I don't know how to edit things, so if that's something that offends you in any way, shape, or form, go in peace. Because guess what? You're not going to get any edits for this. There you go. Unless some kind person out there is willing to do it for free. And I'd rather not do that to them because I already have enough of those people in my life and they do plenty for me. So, with this as well, you may notice hey, we're doing 3 episodes instead of the 2 outside of the 3 we did for the last one. That was kind of special because it was the last couple of episodes for that season. Reason being that honestly, I think we can get a lot more done if we do 3 episodes an episode for the show instead of just 2. Just really makes more sense to me. That way, I think if I did my math right, we'll have 12 more episodes of Mushoku Tensei for everything that's been released in anime before we move on to another project. So there's that. I should also mention as well, I am working on an older microphone of mine. The one I have been using decided it didn't want to stay attached. So I think with this one, I had some issues where it kept picking up my breaths and stuff like that. So I really apologize to anyone who has to deal with that. I understand. Not my favorite thing in the world to listen to either. So without any further ado, let's just get into this bad boy by starting off with a show, with something that I do like in the world of anime, and that would be Ashita no Joe. This is without a doubt one of my, if this is my favorite sports manga and anime of all time. Seeing Joe's journey from this absolute jerk into someone who has a semblance of self, who cares about other people, who actually believes in something more than himself. As time goes on in the series, is amazing. Seeing his failure, seeing his successes. This is boxing done right. Like I'm not a boxing guy by nature, but this made me a believer. And I gotta say, this is in my top 10. So if you guys want to check that out, please go ahead for a far better anime than what we're discussing today. So, speaking of the anime that we're going to be discussing today, we're going to be heading into episode 12, The Woman with the Demon Eyes. Our merry group, as my watch goes off, that's great. Our merry group of Eris and Rudeus and Rudeus have now arrived at the ocean, and we see Eris playing in the water, getting excited that the water's salty, and she's just having it like the time of her life. And she says she wants to swim in it, and as she starts taking her clothes off to do so, we have Rudeus privately thinking that now that she's 13, her body is really developing nicely. Great way to start off the episode. However, before Eris can go too far with removing her clothes, Rudeus says that the sea is teeming with monsters, so they can't go in. So no resort towns on the demon continent. Wasn't really expecting that anyway, but now we know for sure. So as the credits roll, we then see Roxy arriving on a ship to the same city that they're at. The two groups pass by each other without either being aware of the other's presence. So let's start about this opening scene. Very effective of like showing, that childish joy of like being at the ocean for the first time at the beach and having Eris like just like express herself that way. It's really nice. And Rudy's even commenting on it. It's like, that was good until Rudeus ruins everything by just commenting on her figure. Oh, amazing. That 2 age gap would be another thing. But once again, we're dealing with someone who's mentally in his 40s. Isn't that just so great? Isn't that so wonderful? Love it. Love it so much. That's why I love the series. It's for stuff like that. What I do like as well the opening scene is Ruger like, hey, calmly bringing up there are monsters out there. That's why no one really goes in the ocean that much. So that's a fine opening scene. We'll move on from there to the rest of it as we get to the point where they're at this town and we flip over to the other group, which we'll get their names in a bit. There's a dwarf, the elf, and Roxy. And the dwarf is happy that they're on dry land again, as he is not a very seaworthy man himself. And they head off to find Rudeus, not knowing that he's booking passage on another ship right beside them. With the man that they're talking to there, calling the party dead end, as he calls them by names other people have used for them and monikers they've used for him, with Eris being known as Mad Dog, Rudeus as the Guard Dog, and for Rudeus himself, he is called Kennel Master Rugard or Rugard. I had a hard time understanding the Japanese there. It was spelled out as Rugerd. So, what's that? Who knows? And this, of course, makes him upset because he's not more well known. He's not known by his name. They added some other name out there, and he privately wishes that he could collar up Eris later. Our main character, everyone. So they find that the ship will cost 200 green ore coins, which apparently is a lot. Part of the reason for that is they kind of notice Rugerd and they're like, oh, is he actually super? Well, who knows? So they then leave, not having the money yet. So they go and regroup and figure out what to do about the money, as it would take too long. As even if they took several S rank jobs, and through that conversation, Eris starts thinking that maybe Rudeus wants to leave Rugerd behind, but he denies it, saying that he doesn't have a solution yet. And mentally, he starts considering like selling off his staff, as Rugerd apologizes for not having a solution. So at the end of the meeting, they all decide they're going to go find ways to get money. Now at night, Rudeus wonders how he'll get out of this one as he dreams of the man god again, who says it's been a year since they last spoke. Rudeus had really hoped never to see him again. And I, for once in my life, agree with Rudeus. As, he doesn't understand his motives. He's being very flighty about things. And the man god does nothing to help his point of view in this conversation. And I still believe he is out there to harm Rudeus and maybe, I don't know, future wives and children or something. Maybe one of them ends up being a threat to the man god later on, and that's why maybe he's hoping to destroy that lineage or something. I don't know. I'm just throwing stuff at the wall, seeing if it sticks. So the man god says that he'd hoped Rudeus would have just handed the adventurers earlier, the ones who had the animals in their cages, then were selling them off. Excuse me, were actually stealing them in the first place, taking on the jobs to find them. Say, oh, no, wow, we found your animal. So the man god's plan was for Rudeus to just hand them to the guards, which would have helped bond him and Rugerd together because that would be the lawful way of doing things. But instead, when his plan was to exploit them, things went a little off the rails. So, and the man god also points out that Rudeus has only gotten this far thanks to his help and tells him to go buy food from a street vendor and take a walk through the back alleys, but he refuses to explain why he needs to do that as the dream fades away. So, in regards to this, the mixed connections thing, the misconnections thing is well played. I mean, it's a large city. I mean, especially Roxy is there for the first time. She doesn't know where she's going. Rudeus and his gang didn't really know where they're going either, so they're not really paying attention to their surroundings. They're trying to figure out where they're gonna obtain their goal, which is, hey, Roxy's trying to find Rudeus. Rudeus is trying to get Eris back home. Why would they be thinking to look around and say, oh, maybe Roxy's around? Oh, maybe Rudeus is around here? No, it makes perfect sense for them to keep missing each other. I do like that. It's a fine aspect of what's going on here. The whole, the fact that their names are messed up for their exploits. And of course, Mad Dog is like perfect for Eris. I mean, Rabbit Dog might even be better. And I mean, even though Rugerd is a guard dog in a sense, and calling Rudeus Kennel Master is not that off base. It's just not the cool name he wanted. And also, his real name isn't being used in that. So that's fine. And then, of course, we've got the recurring theme of the racism against the superb, where It is heavily implied that the guy knows that's who he is, so that's why he charges as much as he does to get them to pay to take passage elsewhere. That's fine and dandy. Um, Now let's get to the man god himself. I got a little ahead of myself, but I don't trust him one bit. That's one of those things. When he's on screen, it's just what you ever met those skeevy people in your life, and I cannot trust a single word that you are saying right now. That's him. That is him for me. I don't know if I'm repeating myself from last time. It's been a while since I listened to that one. I don't like him. I want him gone. I want him gone from my screen and out of Rudeus and everyone else's lives. But I mean, I could be wrong. He could be a good guy. I just don't think I'm wrong. And we'll move on from there in the next scene, where we see Eris and Rudyard sparring the next day as Rudeus has gone off to do as asked by the man god in this ordeal. As they're doing this, Rudyard notices Roxy watching them, which distracts Rudyard enough for Eris to land a hit on him, which excites her. And we get a nice it's like a scene of her just like jumping up for joy. It's like, hey, I landed a hit. It's so great. It's amazing. And not knowing that the only reason she did was because he was distracted. But still, pretty impressive. Rudius, meanwhile, thinks about the man god's words as he realizing he's actually following his plans. And he sees a woman walk by him with blue hair and he thinks of Roxy. He overhears a woman having sex and gets excited, missing Roxy once more. That one's a little more on him. Of course, many things are on Rudius. And he then finds a beggar asking for food, who says it has been 300 years since her resurrection and she's to die of starvation now. So he feeds her, which reinvigorates her, and she thanks him, asking for his name, and names herself Kishirika Kishirisu. Kishirika Kishirisu. I should have practiced that one more. And of course, she is the great emperor of the demon world. Thinking that it's just a child playing a game, a child in some very provocative clothing, Rudius decides to play along and pretends to show fealty, which she falls for hook, line, and sinker, saying that's the reaction she's always wanted. Her eye suddenly spins, her left eye, if I remember correctly, revealing multiple colors as it settles on green, which surprises her as she calls him disgusting. Since she owes him her life, she will grant him one wish. But Rudius's wishes for wealth, half the world, or her body don't work as she's penniless, doesn't control the whole world yet, and she has a fiance this time around. She then offers him one of her demon eyes, and she casually plucks his own eye out and replaces his eye with one of hers. Hope that image is okay on YouTube. Who knows? And she then thanks him for the food, says to call upon her if he needs help, and leaves him. Now, through this, Rudius has discovered that he now possesses the Eye of Foresight, which allows him to see things several seconds into the future. He bumps into a man as he's kind of dealing with this double vision thing he's having going on. He's got his regular vision, but he's also got the Eye of Foresight messing with his ability to perceive things as well. And he apologizes to the man, but he sees a vision of that man being hit by a pot. So he uses wind magic to push him out of the way, which the man realizes after the fact as Rudius leaves. These things. And we're going to see in other episodes how these kind of tie together, some of it poorly. But for right now, the whole thing of Rudius being distracted by hearing, a woman just loudly, and I mean loudly, in both sub and dub, having sex with people is just atrocious. It's terrible. I hate this aspect of that character in particular. We'll get her name in a little bit. I hate that Rudius is perving on it. That's the kind of thing is that if I'd ever heard that walking around, I'd go, okay, I'm going another direction. I don't need anything about what's going on over there. And instead of Rudius being Rudius, he has to go investigate. But the price of his investigation, at least temporarily, is he misses Roxy again. So there's a cost to it, I think I'm not happy about the contrived way it happened, but there it is. And of course, like, Rudius, there are heroic aspects to his character. He doesn't, leave that man to get hit by the flower pot. He actually pushes him away, not knowing his name or what he is. So that's good for him too. Now let's get to Kishirika. I like Kishirika. I hate her design so much. Her clothing is the definition of something drawn for lolly bait. I like it. It's an image. If I showed it on YouTube, this whole channel, even though we don't have money, we'd get demonetized. It's and it plays in a whole trope of, well, she's actually a 100-year-old demon queen. That makes it okay that we put a little lolly in these little outfits and everything to show off everything that doesn't exist because we're making it look like a child. I hate and despise that so much. It has no place anywhere. And yet it keeps cropping up multiple times over. And it's a shame because she herself is so fascinating. I just can't get over her design. And I don't think I should. Like, I'd be beating someone if they handed this to me and said, well, here's my character. I'm going to introduce this new concept to in this series. How can you do that? How can you sexualize a character like in this specific fashion, knowing they look like a child? I despise that so much. I kind of want to just go over to Japan right now for the express purpose of just beating up the author. This for many other reasons as well. But let's actually talk about her character, about Kishirika's character, because I find her engaging. I find her interesting in this whole, like, how powerful is she? What's going on here? She needs food, but she's not utilizing as like a supposed demon emperor her power and authority in that regard. It doesn't seem like people know who she is and anything like that. That's interesting as well. The eyes. This is a fantastic idea. As down as I've been on this episode, I really like the eye addition to the lore, to the world building, and to Rudeus himself. Because it's such an interesting power up to give your main character. Because Rudeus, as we've noted before, is not someone who is naturally gifted at swordsmanship or anything like that. We're going to see how this is applied to him. I like the idea a lot. And it's kind of the whole, Naruto thing of, we'll just transplant people's eyes and just put them in someone else's body, and of course they'll be perfect matches for each other. Science, we don't worry about science. So there's that. But I also kind of like it because it's one of the things that obviously I hadn't watched this until recently, but other stuff that I've published, one of my main characters, Nathan, has an eye that kind of, in a sense, does similar things, but his is more like seeing the color of death. And his eye will actually, twist around, and if he sees like a specific aura around someone, he knows, oh, they're about to die or they're supposed to die. That's how, it's kind of a predestined thing in that regard. So I like that. I was really inspired by another, and oh gosh, Garden of Sinners and Tsukihime and all that in that regard. So I like the idea, and I think this is a great addition to Rudeus as a person, and that he has this ability that gives him a leg up on everyone, but it doesn't make him overpowered in any way, shape, or form. Because someone can still work around it. So that's great. Now we'll move on. We see Rudeus explaining what happened to Rugerd, who has heard of Kishirika, but has never met her, although he has, like we've mentioned, he's heard her. He says that she conceals 12 eyes inside of her with great power. Rudeus apologizes then for wasting time to rest and dissuades Eris from seeking Kishirika out when he sees the look in her eyes, that very, oh, I knew you're about to make a dumb decision kind of move. But Eris decides to look for her anyways. Later on, we see it takes him about a week to get used to the eye, as it helps channel mana for him to see 2 seconds ahead. He spars against Eris and manages to dodge her for a bit, and then actually manages to pin her down in the fight, And even when she attempts to fight dirty, the eye still helps him win by stopping her before she could do it, so she concedes defeat and leaves after a little praising him for a little bit. Rude himself praises Rudeus for adapting to the new ability, saying he knew of a superb warrior who died before he could master a similar one. Rudeus then tries to fight him and ends up bruised and battered. My preferred state for seeing Rudeus. Later that night, Eris is a little upset at being upstaged again by him because she's been training hard and yet he just got something handed to him that automatically, in a sense, makes him better. It doesn't totally, but just a kid thinking I got beat once after all the work I've done. So, of course, Eris is upset by that. So, Rudy is, after she has fallen asleep, leaves the inn behind to sell his staff until Rudyard stops him, saying he shouldn't because the staff means a lot to him, just like Roxy's necklace, since Eris made it for him. And there's a little interplay there of like, would you sell either one of these things? And Rudy says yes, and that upsets Rudyard. So they kind of have a little back and forth of Rudius being too pragmatic for his own good, and Rudyard having this ideal way of how things should be done. So Rudyard tells him to stop relying on himself and to share his burdens with them. Rudius explains in this conversation that other options like stowing away or being smuggled would be seen as evil by Rudyard, so he didn't want to upset him by bringing up and or doing those things. And it kind of getting a little back and forth there. Rudyard refuses to listen, but until he says, "I'm going to give up my own pride for your sake," and he will turn a blind eye to all the evil that is done until they get home safely. And then later makes a comment, says, speaking from the heart is very hard work. Excellent line. They are then interrupted by the appearance of Gallus Cleaner, the man Rudy has saved earlier. And Gallus says he wants to help him out as thanks as we end our episode. So let's go into this one. The interplay between Eris's abilities and her growth versus Rudius's, I think, was very small scene, but effective enough. And hey, this gives a huge edge over her ability. If he knows what she's about to do, he can counter it and then counterattack that. So, of course, for someone like her who is used to being second best in many respects, swordsmanship was where she had just excelled, and now he's gained a leg up on her. So, of course, she's going to be upset. And, of course, he's dense enough to not understand that until it's pointed out to him. That's good. Like, that's a good character conflicts there. And what I'm kind of on the fence about is Rudyard's resolve in this whole sense of, hey, I don't want to do these evil things. They're against my moral code. But above all else, I want to bring you kids there. So I think at the end of the day, I'm fine with it. And it works as an effective enough compromise between Rudyard and Rudius in that, hey, we'll do this thing. I'm not real big on it, but if it means you guys go home, yes, let's do it. I'm all about that. So yeah, I think at the end of the day, I'm fine with it. So we'll move on from there to episode 13, Missed Connections. Here we go. Alina Lees, the elf that has been with Roxy this whole time, says as they enter a tavern, an adventurer's guild, or something like that she enjoys the smell of men's sweat, asking the dwarf, Tallhan, if he agrees, and he says that she's acting too shamelessly. Roxy reminds her that they're not there to find men, which Alina Lees agrees to, but she's too excited. Roxy wonders what would happen if Alina Lees got pregnant and gets angst about her own figure compared to her. In the meantime, she's also asked by a bunch of C rankers, if she wants to join their party. She reveals that she's an A rank. As they ask her if she is Roxy McGurdia, so her name is known, so that's pretty cool. Since she is an accomplished mage, and also because she's so small in figure and everything else. So, got to talk about that too. Later on, she asks, Elena Lee teases her about the men as Roxy says that she can't waste her time on romance, and she gets messed with by some adventurers while they drink. Later on, she asks Tall Hand and Elena Lee what Paul was like back in their days adventuring, and they both, without hesitation, just call him scum and don't wish to discuss him. But she notes that even with that, they still are both there to help her find him. Opening scene of this episode. Effective for Roxy. Uh, uh, Not as effective for Tall Hand. His character is more subdued in that manner, but Lynn-Elise is. We'll talk about her in a moment. So it establishes, how they know what they're doing there, why they're there in the first place. I'm fine with that. That's pretty good. Then when we move on, we'll go to this moment here where Roxy and the team are commenting on Dead End and the Soup Haired, you know, noting that they're both feared immensely and that a party with that name just became famous. So they're looking, that's why early on she was looking for Ruchard and Eris, not knowing about Rudeus. And Alinalise wants to bed that Soup Haired, while Tallhan relates to known info about the group, which of course contradicts the truth, but they don't know that. They're just basically off of hearsay and stuff like that. They decide not to pursue them since they have other matters to attend to. They discuss instead finding Paul's family and that they'll gather intelligence tomorrow. Now, at the beach the next day, Roxy wonders how old Rudeus has gotten as she sees Eris and Ruchard sparring that we saw in the last episode, and runs away when Ruchard notices her, fearing he's a Soup Haired, and at that moment she barely misses Rudeus. So out of the two in that situation, the one who had the right more to not notice her surroundings, I'm throwing the ball to Roxy. Imagine that. Now, as she passes by that scenario, she hears, and then when she enters the door, watches, not by her own choice, Alinalise having sex with multiple men, who then asks her to join in on the fun as she has multiple sexual partners. But Roxy, rightly so, freaks out and starts blasting out spells in fear. That part, not so much, but the other part, yes. Now, this then forces them to leave the city, as Roxy notes that paying for the repair for her spells, well, they cost a little too much damage, and it was a bit too much money to afford doing that. So, and Alinalise in this moment doesn't accept blame from Roxy as she reveals her sexual perversions as she wants Roxy to become a woman too. But Roxy doesn't want it to go Alinalise's way, preferring instead to find a tall, slim young man who's manly but still makes childish expressions and will save her one day in a labyrinth and they'll team up and then they'll just be a couple after that. Alinalise calls her a child for believing in such a thing, and they continue on their journey to find Rudeus and company. I think, okay, yeah, I have a lot of problems with some of this, but as a contrast between the two of them, Roxy versus Alinalise is an interesting dynamic. And as we learn more about Alinalise, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, I've said like 5 different ways of saying it. It's not a name I'm accustomed to. The contrast between them is interesting to a point. And Roxy's a little more puritanical, and even that word, by the way, is a very poor way of expressing things. You really should read up on the Puritans. They got down. They were wild people. If you actually study them, there's of course the Victorians had to change people's perceptions of them, so there's that. Plenty of slander to go against the Puritans. But you understand what I mean when I say that word. Opposed to more Alinalise being a more sexually free and open, a modern wave of feminism in that regard, a very poor way of living out life. And there is a story reason for why. It's one of the dumbest reasons in the world. Definitely written by a man so that you can have a character act like this way. But we'll get there when we get there. So for right now, there's enough fun in the contrast where it's not too bad, but it is very apparent whose side the author is actually on here. And it's not Roxy. And as she's finding herself, exploring things, trying to find Rudeus, trying to be that good teacher, helping out the family that gave her a home, that made her feel safe for a while. She's in the world again. And honestly, I don't really blame her for how she views her ideal man, considering what she's been dealing with as her time as a tutor in the kingdom. To, by the way, we've seen at least on screen 2 times, and probably more beyond that, her being sexually molested by the prince. It makes perfect sense for her to be raised, to have this idea this way of what her relationship should be like later on. So her being teased by Lynn Elise came off a little cruel, but I don't think Lynn Elise knows everything that happened there, so I'll cut her a little slack. And of course, we've seen her family and everything, so of course she probably got raised with more romantic notions of relationships and everything. And then we get to Lynn Elise herself. As time goes on in this show, she grows on me as a character. But there are certain facets of her personality that don't go away. I find troubling and I find misogynistic, to be perfectly honest. And her whole, free sex feel, we'll just do whatever we want, no consequences. And it's brought up multiple times about, in this episode of that, potential pregnancy and something like that. And you'll find later on, like, that might be what she's gunning for. So it's one of those things that I can't talk too much about without spoiling other things. Those of you who aren't, watching, who are watching this, episode to episode like I am. So I don't know. I have an immense problem with the Lynn Elise as a character. It's clearly written as a fetishistic idea. The whole a very Heinlein kind of thing in certain regards of how free love and have as many partners as you want, no consequences, there are no repercussions for these things, and reality is anything but. So don't use her as your role model for your yeah, we'll just stop right there. Don't use her as your role model. So moving on from there, we see Rudeus, Eris, and Rouge are being smuggled aboard a ship thanks to Gallus's plans, as they agreed to liberate some goods for them at a smuggler's location later on another island. This scene. Rudeus then fantasizes about some catastrophe happening to them, which causes Eris and he to end up alone on a deserted island where she's initially pushy and doesn't like him, and later on she eventually falls in love with him and they have sex. However, in reality, Eris is seasick and wonders if she's going to die, as Rudeus pervs on her as she's completely and utterly helpless at his whims. Wanting to take care of things and not willing to openly molest her like he's done before. Rudeus then goes to relieve his passions and returns as Eris notices a strange smell. Isn't that just peak comedy, guys? Isn't that so great? They then arrive at their island destination, and Rudeus notes that they have another ship to go on to later. Eris asks if he'll stay with her and keep healing her, as she's just lying down, upset and very unwell. And he snidely remarks that he might try something dirty next time, and she calls him mean, which he gets upset about for some reason, because it was so very hard for him to keep himself in check. He could have done multiple things to her, terrible things to her, but he kept himself in check. He's a good guy, guys. Rudeus is a good guy. See, he didn't molest a girl. He could have had the opportunity to do so while she was completely and utterly helpless. He just thought about it and really wanted to do it, and then took care of things in that regard just so he wouldn't go through with it. Yeah, this is our engaging character. This is the people we want people to look up to. She then agrees to let him have a little touch because she's weak and helpless and not thinking straight. But he refuses, saying he wants her to get prepared to get really messed up. An 11-year-old child, by how she is looking at things, just said that to her, not knowing there's a 30-plus-year-old man inside of that child. Hmm. Rudeus then leaves to go find Ruijerd and goes to a smuggler's building run by people Gallus wants them to fight. This is the worst scene in the episode. I hate this so much. In any other episode, if you were setting up your characters for a potential relationship, you would have a scene like this where one is a little more vulnerable than the other, one plays a Florence Nightingale kind of role, and it's even gender reversed too. So that's an interesting premise of Rudy's healing her. She's very upset and seasick and not willing. Yeah, she can't even do anything because she just feels bad. She's not thinking of things like modesty or what other people are looking at right now. So when things shift around and he sees it, what does he do? He takes advantage of the scenario, then abuses her trust even further by just going off to do what Rudeus does, ruining everything, including his own body. And it's so stupid because we're supposed to laugh at that scene. We are supposed to laugh at that scene. There's no world out there where the author did not intend for that to be comical. And it's not. It's miserable. I hate it. I hate everything that it represents. It had, but I also know what show I'm dealing with. So there's that. I'm saying all the women in the show deserve better than him, but since they're being written as waifu bait, they're going to end up with Rudeus. Calling it now about we'll see with the multiple wives scenario. Yeah. Next scene, we see Rudeus watching a giant dog surrounded by a magic circle, and he sees some beastkin being made into slaves until he locates Ruijerd, who he promises to free. But before that can happen, Ruijerd tells him that the smugglers have 5 beastkin children held as slaves, and there was a 6th, but they were killed for crying too loudly. These indeed are the goods that Gallus wants for his own, which disheartens the both of them. Ruijerd wants to kill them all as they murder children. Rudeus attempts to find a way to resolve things peacefully, as Ruijerd tells him that his hands are for keeping Eris safe, so he'll be the one to do the dirty work. Ruijerd then breaks out of his bonds and kills the slavers one by one, allowing Rudeus to break the children out of captivity. And he tells them he's there to save them. There's a moment where they're not really sure about him, but he does lay down his weapon and heals them. And what would have been a heroic scene until he starts perving on their breasts as he does so. And these are implied to be middle school age children. Not that it's ever stopped Rudeus before. And some of them even younger than that. Ruijerd then comes back, having killed the other smugglers and slavers, and he apologizes for being unable to save the child. Rudeus tells him to follow him, tells the beastkin to follow him in their own language as they escape. But one of the kids remembers the dog, so she asks him to save it. Rudeus agrees, telling Ruijerd to lead them away. He then finds that the dog itself is trapped inside of a barrier, which prevents it from fleeing. So he then destroys the barrier, freeing the dog, which then licks him, and he immediately loves it. And a very fun scene. Starting off there, it's just like, hey, there's this giant floof ball grabbing around you. So Rudeus is just doing what a normal kid would do in that scenario and just playing with the dog. But since he looks like he does, when a beastkin man arrives who had hoped to free the slaves and the dog, he calls the dog a sacred beast and decries Rudeus for defiling it and for the look on his face as he was doing it. The man then paralyzes Rudeus with a roar and tells his father, who was another guy who came to help out, that Rudeus was fondling the sacred beast with a lewd look on his face. The father then goes to track down the children, while the other man takes Rudeus and a sacred beast so that Rudeus can face punishment for his crimes. The rescue. This is great. The reveal of what they were supposed to be bringing to Gallus. Say, oh, well, maybe he's got a heart of gold after all. Nope. He's a slaver. He's a charlatan. He's a miserable person. We better put him out of his misery later on. Great scene. And then Ruger, when he tells Rudeus, being like, "Hey, your hands are meant for protecting Eris. You're not meant to kill people. That's just I don't want to have you go through that." So he does all the dirty work for him. That's Ruger to a T. Excellent for him. And to a point, Rudeus does extremely well. He's very kind to the kids. No, he's making sure he's not threatening to them. He even heals them until there's that scene where he's just looking down and seeing their breasts. And once again, to these very traumatized children, an older man in a younger body is doing this to them for his own personal satisfaction. And once again, I read comments about how this was funny. Isn't it funny that Rudius was doing this to these poor girls who've been stripped from their homes, forced into these terrible outfits, not knowing if they were going to live and die, especially since they saw one of their own be murdered simply for crying too much? But no. It's funny that he's doing this in the scene. I hate Rudius so much. Under a competent writer's hands, you remove that entirely, this scene is practically flawless. But Rudius has just got a Rudius. He's got to ruin everything. Sorry, I'm sighing a lot. I'm not happy with some of the things happening here. So we'll move on from there to episode 14. No such thing as a free lunch. We have some narration where Rudius speaks sarcastically about his new free apartment he's living in, which is really a prison for him for crimes that he's not guilty of, so once he's not wrong. He speaks of how the apartment is rent free, has wonderful accommodations, great food, and has tight security to make sure people can't get inside or leave. And as the opening plays, we see that he is in a kind of a rainforest situation. I mean, the situation and rainforest kind of mixed together. And we see the treetop village of the beastkin he's trapped inside of as they are living their lives, and he is inside of this prison hung over the water where he could live or die, die at any moment. Opening scene. If you want to talk about okay comedy, it's not the best, but I did laugh inwardly at this. Is that sarcastic moment of, oh man, everything's great here. Like I identify with that. I jive with that. I think that was well enough. It's not funny, but it's funny enough to get a reaction out of me. Does that make any sense? Of him like, well, this is my life now. I'm stuck in this new apartment where all my meals are here. I got everything I need. And it's obviously because that's the only way he can handle his reality right now is to just, make fun of the situation. So we'll go to the next scene where we see that Rudius is stuck there naked and without a way of escape. When one of his jailers, a female beastkin, comes up to bathe him essentially with a splash of water, he tries to plead his innocence, but the people there despise him, calling him a deviant, which is true. But as he thinks, he might be developing a new fetish of being captured and imprisoned and having water thrown on you. Well, great job, author. That's so fun. And he prays to Roxy for help. Now, he decides to wait for Eris and Ruger to find him as he looks at one of his jailers lewdly, the one woman who's been throwing water on him, because she has large breasts. He's been there for 3 days and keeps waiting for help, but eventually just gets bored over time. And until a human man gets thrown into this little prison with him, And he is surprised, as he should be, by the very naked Rudeus, telling him that, who then tells the man that he's on the last stop on the road of life. Rudeus then asks him how what he did to get caught. Anime explains that he was cheating at dice, as Rudeus explains that he got thrown in for touching some dog. And the man acts and says, "Oh, that's why everyone's angry, since they're claiming that some sex-crazed beast assaulted the sacred beast, exactly what he deserves." Um, the man's name is Geese, and he recognizes Rudy's name, but he doesn't remember where from. And Rudy's asks if he knows, Rudyard and Eris, and Geese starts calling him boss, is kind of like the whole thing of like he's been in there longer, therefore he's the boss. As Rudeus gets upset that he's been taken under false pretenses. So the imprisonment. Very effective. As far as the Beastkin tribe is aware, he is one of the smugglers who stole their children, probably murdered some people, and now has done something that, out of context, looks like he was doing something lewd to the sacred beast. So of course they hate him. Like it makes a lot of sense. Not even willing to listen to him. I don't really know what the Beastkin example of a trial by jury of your peers would be in this scenario. I don't think Rudy is going to make it out. And that's fine. And him being thrown in there with Geese, we introduced to this new character. It's a fine introduction for him, as he's just kind of like go with the flow. There's this crazy kid spouting off some pseudo wisdom about their scenario, that what's going on in their lives. So he's fine. He's okay as a character. He's not my favorite by any stretch of the imagination, but I like him well enough. I'll go from there to the next scene where Geese later massages Rudeus at night, and I guess what else are you going to do with your time? As Rudeus asks him if he can break out of there and make it to Zant Port, as Rudeus is worried about his companions. They didn't notice the guards are gone and it's getting hot, as the forest is now on fire, and so is their prison. Rudeus did what he could have done a while ago, where he uses earth magic to break out of the prison and they flee, gathering their supplies and everything. So Rudeus has the staff and everything, while the Beastkin are being attacked by slavers who have set fire to the village and are killing some of the men, taking the women and the children for their own nefarious ends. Seeing this, Rudeus decides to attack them, even though he doesn't like the villagers. But his motivation is because they'll owe him if they fight, and Geese joins him to save them. So instead of like, oh, well, people are about to be taken away by slavers, I should probably do something. It's like, oh, they'll owe me one. That's why Rudeus does it. Our main character, everyone. So nice. Now we see that the man who paralyzed him in the last episode is intervening and asks him to help find the children. They agree to do so as they start killing the slavers until Gallus is revealed as their leader. He holds a girl hostage and says that, Eris and Rudeus were really good for holding the attention and distracting the Beastkin, working as a decoy to get the Doldia's attention away. Gallus, in an unnecessary move that got fully animated, feels up the child he's kidnapped and offers Rudeus the chance to join him. As the Beastkin man from earlier intervenes, but gets sliced up by Gallus, as Geese reveals from watching it that the sword techniques that he uses are North God style. Gallus calls himself the North Saint, Gallus the Cleaner, which of course terrifies him, everyone around, because that means just how competent he is. He has a title and everything to go along with his skill. Makes perfect sense. Rudeus weighs his options, and when he hears the girl cry for help, he still does nothing. But what makes him intervene is the arrival of the sacred beast, not doing it for the sake of doing what was right, or hearing a little girl cry out for help. No, it's when the dog comes in. Which, sure, you got backup now, but you really going to stand for your principles, buddy boy? Not really. Until, other people on your side. And they didn't, the Sacred Beast then joins the fight against Gallus. And Rudeus says that he can't let the name Dead End be associated with villainy. So he's not going to join Gallus. Nothing's going to work in that regard. Using his newly acquired eye, Rudeus evades Gallus until he gets hit by a hidden dagger that he couldn't prepare for. He didn't have the time to roll out of the way in time, so that was effective enough as a counter to his ability. But the sacred beast saves him. Many people would argue against. I'd be one of them. Geeston stops Gallus long enough for Rudeus to kill him with a magical explosion until he collapses from the strain. Well, I think I skipped something. Oh, I definitely skipped over. There's a scene, sorry about that, where Rudeus has summoned uh, one of his cumulonimbus spells to create enough water to drench out the flames of the village, which is to help protect people there. That was a good scene. So that's the reason why he will right now uh, collapse from the strain of fighting and of controlling that spell. He then wakes up later to find Eris calling out his name, as she's joined by Ruijerd, who explains that he's in the Dodolia's house now. Eris praises him for taking out a North Saint as Gyes. It was only said once. It's Gyes. So, however the heck you say that name, the man, Gyes, the man who got slashed by Gallus, and as well Rudy's his female jailer he was perving on, both ask for his forgiveness by going onto their backs. Is that dog behavior? I don't think so. And just put themselves in a vulnerable position to say that we're beg for your forgiveness and tell him that they'll do anything he wills. The chieftain interrupts them, thank God. And that's what Rudeus would have done to that poor woman. And thanks him for his help, as Eris regales Rudeus with a story about how they joined up with Gustav, the chief, and then went to kill the remaining smugglers until they came back to the village. And Rudeus then notes that this place is a Boreas Grey Rat's dream because beastkin are everywhere. Can't forget about their fetish. And Eris says she can't wait to tell her grandfather. And in, I will say, a great, what's the one I'm looking for here? Not transition, irony. I don't know. A great way of changing things up. After she says that, we then go over to a scene of Soros about to be executed by a man named Darius, as he is being used as a scapegoat for the poor handling of the Mana Cataclysm. Which, hey, uh, who's prepared for something like that? It's just a safe face to have him die off. Say it's his fault. As we see some future characters in the background that I noticed in the scene, I noticed that the when I first watched this, I was like, oh, who are them? I completely forgot about the scene until I rewatched it today. So yes, we'll see other characters there later on. As Soros, with his dying, thoughts, wishes that Eris would find happiness. There you go. The rescue scene would be good. Would be good. Rudeus Forge himself. There's that scene, like it starts off so well. Him assembling the cumulonimbus spell, or it's enchanted, so maybe it's not that, and maybe it's something else that puts the fire out of the village for the people who didn't treat him well or anything like that. That's would be such a selfless move on the part of him, but he's got to ruin it, like he ruins everything, by just talking about how they'll owe him one. Now, look, hey, you do something like this for a village, they probably owe you one. There's nothing wrong with saying that in your head. There's plenty wrong with that being your main motivation for why you're doing what you're doing. That's cowardly. That's not what I want our main character to do, unless they're going to become better along the way. And he doesn't, in certain regards. So that just makes me upset as a viewer in this scene. And as well, we get that moment where we see it's him and Gallus and Geese, and Gallus has got the poor little Beast King girl holding her captive, and got the scene of, hey, if you just join us, you can get in on this. You can have any of them you want, anything like that. Just join with me. And Rudeus doesn't agree with him, but neither does he make a move to attack him, partly because he's afraid of what will happen to the girl. But when Gallus's back is to him, and I would argue this is not a cowardly act, you know he's better at swordplay than this, you could have just shot him in the back with your staff using a magical spell. But Rudeus doesn't intervene until the numbers are on his side in that regard, until the sacred beast comes. And I hate that. It's a cowardly action. It's one that, honestly, I expect better of him. And I know I'm setting myself up for failure, but I want to believe in our main hero being a hero. And there are scenes later on where Rudeus is going to do heroic things. But it's moments like this, it's like they haven't really made up for it. So providentially, they're able to save the kid, but not because of Rudeus's actions, not until the very end, where he is able to kill Gallus, which is a huge moment for him too. Uh, willingly killing someone else to save other people. I'm not going to shy away from that. That's a huge character moment for Rudeus there, so I will throw it that way for him. But his motivations ruin everything. If he was, I don't know. I've said it multiple times over. Do I really need to repeat myself? He just needs to be better. So let's go to a better scene than that, where we get to Saros's execution. So, stay with me here. There's this massive cataclysm that happens, where people are ripped from their homes, thrown miles away into other continents. You're just starting to prove that. And now, for the people left behind, you've got people from other regions of the world that are now in your area now. So there's a refugee crisis. There are houses that got destroyed. You've got entire nations having to deal with the fallout of this. I don't want to be the one in charge of that. And neither do the people who throw blame on Soros. Now, he's not a good man. It is heavily implied through these episodes that he gets his beastkin maids from men like Gallus. So that's a huge strike against him. But as far as actually leading, as far as actually caring about his people, he did what he could. And yet he ends up as a scapegoat. And I think this is well done writing on that end, is that it sets up these people who execute him as monsters who we need to see get what's coming to them later on. And if we don't, that's one more thing I'm going to be upset about in this series. Because this is an unjust execution. It's not his fault the Mana Cataclysm happened. It's not his fault that people weren't prepared to deal with the aftermath. So why murder him? Well, because then it's my fault if things go wrong. If I can blame you, then people aren't going to be looking at me. That's a great political move. And we've already seen like the whole Grey Rat situation. I'm assuming this is a member of the Grey Rats who is ordering his execution or something like that. And to be fair, Soros kind of one of them dead too. But yeah, it's an unjust death. But his last thoughts are of his granddaughter. And I fully appreciate that. Knowing the fullness of who Soros is as a person, the slaves he's kept and everything, it's still a very touching scene. He doesn't think about himself or his title or his position or his accomplishments. He thinks of his granddaughter and her happiness. I will say that's really well done. So we're done with these 3 episodes. Thank God. So let's score them off. Episode 12, I'm giving a B minus. Kind of self-evident from the episode. 10, a D plus. The rescue scene was so great until Rudeus ruins everything. But the whole interplay between Elenalise and Roxy and Elenalise's characterization, I despise that part of the episode so much. It ruins it. I want nothing to do with it. No more. 11B. Excuse me, not 11. Episode 14B. A solid enough rating for it. I mean, I knocked off some points for how Rudeus acted in the episode, but other than that, I mean, solid action, great animation. It's just Rudeus ruins everything. And I know, there's a part of me, it's like, and we get to other genres along the way. When we get to the Star Wars sequel films, or One More Day or something like that, I'm just going to use Rudeus. It's like, okay, do I hate this person more than I hate Rudeus? And I'm interested to see where things go from there. Yeah. So with that in mind, guys, time to wrap this up. I've had a fun time. I really hope this microphone. If not, if there's breathing and everything in there, I apologize. There's nothing I can do on my end. Please, if you get a chance, leave a 5-star review in your podcasting platform of choice. It helps us with the ratings there. Or if you're listening to this on YouTube, like this video, comment below, and subscribe to the Systematic Geekology or Amazon Ministries podcasting pages. You can email me at whyidontlikepodcast@gmail.com. If you're interested in my fiction writing, you can find my works at StarvingResGuild.com or on Amazon if you search the name MC Ashley. You can also find me podcasting on Systematic Ecology and Let Nothing Move You. Special thanks to Joshua Knoll for the music he provides for the podcast. With all that in mind, I spent a lot of time discussing what I don't like about Mushoku Tensei. But you know what I do like? You listeners. I like you. So see ya, Space Cowboys.